Good morning, students. Welcome back to the online classes by the Department of English. Today, let us deal with the topic report writing. What is a report? You are all familiar with different kinds of reports. You have your progress report, annual report, census report, FIR, first investigation report, etc. What does a progress report say? A progress report speaks on the progress of a student. The name of the student, his father's name, his class, section, how many tests and exams has he attended, and how many marks has he scored, what's the maximum marks for which the test and exam was conducted. And finally, the remarks of the teacher about the progress of the student also is given. So, in every aspect, a progress report of a student speaks about the progress of a student during the course of an academic year. It speaks about his improvement. Now, during the college day function, you might have observed during the formal session, the principal of the college presents an annual report. What is the annual report? The annual report gives us the information about all the activities that have happened in the college during a particular academic year. How many students were enrolled, how many students are studying currently, the names of the students who have brought laurels to the college, and it also speaks about the progress of the college in terms of academics, sports, arts, etc. So, the annual report of a college speaks about the functioning of the college with respect to academics, arts, sports, cultural activities, etc. Now, what is FIR? You might have heard this term quite often. FIR is first investigation report. When you go to a police station and if a case is registered, the police soon after the case is registered comes up with an FIR. It is the first investigation report. So, it speaks about the initial conclusions of the police. What is the case about, what has the police observed, and who are the witnesses, and all these things would be recorded in an FIR. So, we have reports. Always we find if there is an issue, if there is a problem, an institution or an organization usually appoints a commission, and a commission after its inquiry comes up with a report that is submitted to the organization. So, generally speaking, a report is a document that is short, precise, concise and sharp, and it addresses a particular audience. It also is addressing a particular purpose. So, what is a report? I have written its definition on the board. Let us read it. A report is a short, sharp and concise document which is written for a particular purpose and audience. As I told you, particular purpose, a progress report speaks about the progress of the child, and who all knows about the progress of the child will come to know about it, and if he is seeking admission elsewhere, this report can be submitted to that particular institution. The teacher knows, his parents know. So, there is a purpose for every report and audience. So, any report is concise. You don't write all the things that you know in a report. It's so precise and addressing a particular audience, addressing a particular purpose. There is a purpose for which every report is written. Now, there are a few features that we need to discuss regarding report writing. How do you write a report and what are the points that you should remember while writing a report? See, the first point we have already seen when we discussed the definition of it. It should be concise, short, and always keep in mind the purpose of writing a report. You have to communicate and your report should address a particular group of people. The audience may be different depending on different kinds of reports. The second point that we remember about writing a report is that any report is factual. It is based on facts. You cannot bring in your fiction, you cannot bring in your imagination while writing a report. Write a report based on the facts available. That is very important. Now see the next thing, logical order, and it is the description of a sequence of events. When you write a report after an inquiry or based on the data available to you, you need to follow a particular order so that the report is crystal clear. It should follow a logical order. If there are many events, these events should be described one by one based on its significance or based on the years during which the events happened. That's very important. And see the next point, it should be clear and well structured. So there is a structure for the report. Anyone who reads the report will understand what it speaks, what it says. It is just a presentation of facts in an orderly way. And see, introduction, body, conclusion. What does it mean? The three elements that you find while writing a report. Any report should have an introduction. There is an introduction, and what does the introduction say? The introduction speaks about what the report is about and who the report is addressed to or what is the report based on. You may have 2 or 3 lines in the introductory part of the report. Then there is the body of the report which elaborates on the facts. And then there is the conclusion. So the conclusion sums up the report. And sometimes we find that, say, if a committee is doing an inquiry and submitting a report, they may have recommendations. So if you have recommendations, that can be included in the conclusion. Now, when an actual report is written, you need to write many things. See, there is a title page. Then there is an abstract. When you say abstract, this is a summary of the report. A report can be quite long. Suppose a report is of 10 pages. The summary of the report is written soon after the title page. And then there is the introduction, then there is the body of the report, then there is the conclusion. And after conclusion, there comes a part called recommendations. So in an actual report, recommendations come after conclusions, and after looking at the recommendations, the government or the organization can take those steps to improve the current situation. And after recommendation, there will be references, and then there is appendix. So these all things come in a report, but in your second PUC syllabus, you need not write such a long report. Instead, you are provided a few details. There is a graph or a chart provided to you, and based on the chart or graph, you have to interpret the data available, and that data has to be written in the form of sentences. So it is basically the analysis of the chart or graph that you do in your examination paper when you get a report writing. So in my class on speech writing, I have already informed you that you can always choose between speech writing and report writing. If you wish to write a speech, you can select that. or you can select report writing. So another key element about report writing is that it compares and contrasts. Whatever data is available in front of you, you can always make a comparison and you can bring out the contrast too. Especially if a chart or a bar graph is given to you, you can easily come up with the comparison of the different things that are presented on the graph, the different variables presented on the graph. So comparison and contrast can be done with respect to report writing. And then see, the last element is that it is an objective description. So what do you mean by objective description? Don't bring in your personal images here. Don't bring in your personal things. Don't be subjective. You should look at the report from an objective point of view. So that is very important. You read the graph, you understand the graph, you interpret the details, and whatever conclusions you have come to, write it in the form of sentences and then conclude your report. This is what you are expected to do. Report writing carries 5 marks. What about the style of writing? Your report should always be simple. Always remember that you are trying to communicate. So, you should always objectify the details and write in a simple language. Don't bring in figurative language here. Just write it in a simple language. Second point is that be very clear and specific. Don't use long winding sentences. Be very clear, be specific about the facts that you can see on the graph provided to you. Remember that your report is always different from an essay. When you write an essay, what do? You try to bring in your point of view. So in an essay, we find that a writer tries to defend his point of view. Whereas in a report, that must not happen. You need to look at the graph and present the details in an objective manner. So these are the things that you should keep in mind while writing a report. The first point, it is an objective presentation of facts. The second point, always use a simple language while writing a report. Try to keep yourself away from using figurative language. So there is no scope for idioms and phrases, etc. here in report writing. The third thing is that there should always be a logical order followed when you write a report. And the fourth thing is that you are given a graph. It can either be a bar graph or a line graph, or it could also be a pie chart. So understand what is represented in the graph, and whatever analysis you have made, that you can write in the form of a report. You can have your recommendations and conclusions at the end of the report. So keep in mind the purpose of writing the report. Keep in mind the audience for whom the report is addressed. Now, I don't want to elaborate on the structure of a report in detail because that is not necessary for you in your examination. You need to write a report in 120 words. So, you have to write a report in 120 words and your report writing should not cross 150 words. So, it's a short report that is required, and there should be an introduction and then the body of the report, and then there should be a conclusion also. So let us see what a graph is, what a pie chart is, and then move on to an example of report writing. So let us see what a graph is. Now it is always said that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Isn't it true? A picture is worth 1,000 words. So what is a graph? A graph, see, for you in your second PUC, you are you should be familiar with two kinds of graphs. One is the bar graph and one is the line graph. So a graph is a pictorial representation of facts. It is the pictorial representation of facts. You have two variables in a bar graph or in a line graph, and one comes along the x-axis and one comes along the y-axis, and whatever data you have collected can be presented on the graph. So it shows the relation between variable quantities, especially two variables, one along the x-axis and one along the y-axis. Now, graphs are commonly used in the field of industry, in the field of commerce, in the field of education, in the field of science and technology. You always find graph being used. And it is this analysis, it is the analysis of the graph that is required. So now, let us write a report based on one of the questions that has appeared in a previous year question paper. Let us just understand a bar graph. So you know what a bar graph is. The data is represented by means of bars along the x-axis and y-axis. It can be represented either horizontally or it can be represented in a vertical manner also. Now, it's very important to understand what each label refers to. Once you are able to understand that, report writing becomes easy. See, interpretation of a graph involves reading, understanding and expressing the data represented in a verbal medium, which means read the graph, understand it, interpret it, write it in the form of sentences. So you have to represent the data in the verbal medium. Verbal medium means write in the form of sentences. Make sure that your report is whole. It represents whatever data is there recorded on the bar graph. So here is the question. The bar chart below shows the number of men and women studying engineering in Indian universities. Summarize the information in the chart and report the main features. So this is what the question is, which means you need to understand the graph, you need to interpret the data, you need to come up with your own analysis, and you need to come up with your own comparisons. So write a report in about 120 to 150 words. That is what you are expected to do. So it should not be more than a page. 3/4 of a page to 1 page is the adequate length when you write a report. So just have a look at the data presented here by means of the graph, just to see what does it represent. You have the x-axis and y-axis. So it's a comparison of men and women who were studying in the universities from the year 1992 to 2012, which means a period of 10 years is considered and represented. And then you have the y-axis that tells about the number of students studying for engineering. X-axis presents the years. So a decade is taken into consideration. So in 1992, how many men and women studied? In 2002, how many of them studied? In 2012, how many of them studied? So these years are taken, they are recorded along the x-axis, number of students recorded along the y-axis. So let us first understand the graph. What does it say? See, the long bars, it speaks about the men who had got themselves enrolled in the universities. And look at the small bars along the x-axis, it represents the number of women who have enrolled themselves for their higher studies in the universities. And see, if you look at the number of men, it's always more. But as you look at the graph, you find that the number of women getting themselves enrolled for their higher studies is increasing slowly. Every decade there is an increase of 2,000 women. That is very, very important. In 1992, there were only 2,000 women who were studying in the universities. But look at the year 2002, their number increased, almost doubled, 4,000. And look at the year 2012, again another 2,000 women got enrolled, and altogether there are 600 women studying in the Indian universities. So there is a slow and steady growth in the number of women enrolling for their higher studies, whereas the number of men in 2002 and 2012 remains the same, and the number of men in 1992 was slightly on the higher side. There were altogether 14,000 men studying during that time. So now let us see how to write a report. I have already told you that any report should have an introduction. Now what does the introduction tell us? The introduction tells us about the chart. What does the graph represent? Now let us read the report. The bar chart illustrates the number of men and women studying engineering in Indian universities between the years 1992 and 2012 at 10-year intervals. So the x-axis is defined, y-axis is given, and what does the graph tell in general, that is also given. And see, what does the graph tell us? It speaks about men and women studying engineering courses in Indian universities between 1992 and 2012. And what's the gap? 10-year gap. Every year, how many of them got enrolled? That is not recorded. A 10-year gap is there. So there is 1992, then 2002, and then 2012. So the first sentence, the introduction of your report, tells the reader of the report about the graph and what has it presented. So the x-axis, y-axis, and what the graph is about in general. Now let's see the body. It can be seen that the number of male students fell slightly from 14,000 in 1992 to 12,000 in 2002 and then remained level through the following decade. So, regarding the representation of men on the graph, the next sentence speaks. So, in 1992, there were 14,000 men studying, and later it fell to 12,000, and in 2002 and 2012 it remained the same. The number of female students is relatively low, starting at 2,000 in 1992. However, while the number of men decreased, the number of women increased. Remember, I told you, you can make a comparison, you can always bring out the contrast. See, while the number of men studying decreased in 2002, the number of women getting enrolled or studying engineering courses, that increased. So comparison is there, that contrast is mentioned. Female students grew steadily by 2,000 each decade. And what is the addition? 2,000 students are added every decade. This led to a rise in the total number of engineering students from 16,000 to 18,000 in this period. And you just count the total number of students studying, including men and women. It says that in 1992 there were just 16,000, and now in 2012 there are 18,000 students. Men continue to make up the majority of students. That is true. It's very obvious from the graph. The proportion of female students increased sharply in this period. In 1992, there was 1 woman to every 7 men, but by 2012, this had narrowed down to 1 woman to every 2 men. So again, it's a comparison. If you study 1992, whatever is represented on the graph, you find that just 1 for every 7 men. Whereas in 2012, 2012, what is the situation? Every 2 men will have 1 woman, which means the number of men studying engineering courses in the universities is double the number of females studying. So this is about the body of the report. So there is the introduction which tells us what the report is about, and then the body of the report tells us about what is represented in a logical order, a comparison is made, the contrast is made evident, and then we go to the conclusion. Overall, we can see a clear upward trend in the number of female engineering students in Indian universities, while the number of male students seems to have leveled off. It's a conclusion. So how do you conclude? It is what you have understood after looking at the graph. The number of females studying engineering is growing. There is an upward trend. That is your conclusion. And again, there is no scope for recommendation here. The conclusion is that there is an upward trend with respect to the female engineering students. And what about men? It is leveled off, remains stagnant. In 2002 and 2012, the number of men attending engineering courses, their number remains the same. So this is our conclusion. So there is an introduction, then there is the body, then there is conclusion. So you can write your report in this way. So you have seen the graph, you have understood it, you have interpreted it, and then you have converted your analysis of the graph into sentences. So this graph, this bar graph illustrates this. This is how you begin, then you conclude it by summing up what you have understood after your interpretation. So dear students, this is how you are expected to do in your second year examination. Most often you are given a bar graph. That's why I dealt with a bar graph at the beginning. In our second session on report writing, we will see how to write a report based on line graph and pie chart. Your report should always be compact, concise in 120 words. Use simple language and just to present the facts, bring in the comparison, bring in the contrast, and sum up the report. So in the next class, we will see the other elements. Thank you.